This video will discuss basic strategies for finding foreign laws, particularly when you're researching a jurisdiction you don't have experience with. Two of the biggest obstacles when conducting foreign legal research are: 1. We don't have access to comprehensive all-in-one databases for researching other countries' laws like we do for US law and Westlaw and Lexis. And 2. English translations of other countries' laws are rarely available. Because of these problems, we're largely reliant on secondary sources to conduct our foreign law research. And when we're ready to search for laws directly, we have to rely on a patchwork of free databases provided by governmental organizations, intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, and universities. Practitioners in foreign law might have access to services like Westlaw China or Lexis South Africa, but at Lewis & Clark, we're mostly reliant on whatever we can find for free. So this video will discuss using secondary sources for researching foreign animal law, and finding primary sources using free databases, including some limited translations where available. So what secondary sources are available for researching foreign law? In the last video, we discussed scholarly articles. I always recommend secondary sources like journal articles to begin your research, regardless of whether you're conducting US foreign or international law. But for researching foreign laws, secondary sources are especially important. For example, this article discusses some Colombian cases where courts considered the habeas corpus rights of captive animals. Articles like these are not just helpful for finding summaries of the law, but also necessary if you can't read another country's official language. The trouble with finding journal articles on foreign animal law is that it is a pretty niche topic with relatively little written about it compared to other major legal subjects. We can't always assume that there's actually going to be a relevant article on the specific subject we're researching. On the one hand, that means there's ample opportunity for new scholarship, but the lack of literature also makes foreign animal law more difficult to research. Scholarship, where available, can still provide valuable support for your papers, especially for more general discussions of legal philosophy, but we can't assume that it's going to fulfill all of our research needs when researching a foreign jurisdiction's laws. Realistically, you may need to rely on background information on the open web, like the types of free results you find on Google from nonprofits, blogs, and news websites. These resources can be invaluable for providing overviews of foreign laws and discussions of current events. In legal writing, there's always a preference for citing scholarship or primary law, statutes and regulations, where those are available, but open web resources do still have a role in the research process. One specific open web resource I want to highlight is this World Animal Protection Index. This often does come up in Google when you're researching foreign countries' animal protection laws. It's a ranking of some countries' animal protection laws produced by an NGO. It provides a survey of some major animal protection statutes and regulations throughout the world, and it provides specific legal citations. May not link to the law itself, but it provides at least a citation. Even if you don't cite this website directly in your papers, you might use it as a starting point for gathering background information about foreign laws. If you're able to track down the law itself or a scholarly article that discusses the laws of the type that are mentioned here, generally there's going to be a preference for citing those in your papers over a website like this, but sometimes this is honestly the best available sort of English language explanation of foreign animal laws. Once it's time to actually find the text of the law, either because you found a citation in a secondary source or you were unable to find a secondary source providing an overview of the law and you need to dig a little bit further, you have a few options. If you already have a citation from a secondary source, you can, of course, try Googling it and browsing the results for a website that seems authoritative, such as something from an intergovernmental organization or a university. But what if you can't find the law through Google? I have a few database recommendations for that. The first is Ecolex. This is a database of environmental laws created by a group of intergovernmental organizations. The database features international laws like treaties and treaty decisions, as well as domestic laws like legislation and case law. Although the database focuses on environmental laws, it does feature many laws related to animals that we might not traditionally associate with the environment. For example, if we select legislation and run a search for pet welfare, we see a collection of legislation and regulations related to the protection of pets. We also have these filters on the sidebar, which we can use to limit results to particular countries. Some, but not all of these results will have a link to an English translation. For example, this Slovenian regulation does have a translation available. At the very least, what you'll get here is general information about a law, so even if a translation isn't available, you at least have a starting point for your research. You might end up needing to copy and paste some of the text of these laws into Google Translate if an English translation isn't available. My next recommended database is Fowlex, which is a database of global laws mainly related to agriculture and natural resources, but like Ecolex, it more broadly incorporates some animal laws beyond what we might traditionally associate with those two categories. So Ecolex actually pulls results from Fowlex. So if you're just looking for legislation, regulations, or case law, you don't necessarily have to use Fowlex, but you might prefer how Fowlex is organized, and it may have policy documents not on Ecolex. On Fowlex, you can browse laws by topic, or you can run a keyword search. For example, we might search for laws from all African countries that mention pets. GlobalAnimalLaw.org is my next recommendation. It's not incredibly comprehensive, but it highlights major animal laws from a few countries. If we select the legislation database, we can browse animal laws by country, though keep in mind, very much is not comprehensive, but it does provide links to English translations where available. A lot of these actually come from websites like Fowlex or Ecolex. So just a few places you can try, Ecolex, Fowlex, and globalanimallaw.org, but let's talk about some other options if you're not finding your laws of interest through these resources. If you need to dig a little bit deeper and find legal databases sort of specific to a particular country, like a South African case law database or a Japanese statutory law database, what I recommend is using a research guide specific to that country. So research guides are resources that direct us to primary and secondary sources on a topic, and they may also provide general research advice. Here's an example. This is Georgetown Law Library's German Legal Research Guide. This guide links to databases that contain German primary law, like statutes, regulations, and cases, and recommendations for secondary sources to learn more about German law, like books or dictionaries. Research guides might also include information about English translations where available, so no guarantee that they do, but there's always a possibility. Research guides from other universities may be geared towards students from those universities and sometimes recommend resources that we at Lewis and Clark just don't have access to, but what we want to keep an eye out for is any free, publicly accessible databases that we can access. So for example, this Georgetown guide links to a Laws on the Internet page directly from the German Ministry of Justice with select English translations of German statutes and regulations. We can find research guides from other universities by Googling a country's name and then legal research guide. There are also a couple of websites specializing in foreign legal research guides that I want to highlight. The first is GlobalX at nyulawglobal.org. This one has a great collection of foreign legal research guides. Let's open up the link to foreign law and alphabetical list of countries with links to corresponding guides. We're going to go to their guide on Japanese law. If we look at the table of contents here, we see that the guide starts by providing general background info on the Japanese legal system. It then moves on to recommending databases and research tips for finding primary and secondary sources. And then after that, it provides some resources for finding the law in specific subject areas. And if we scroll down, we'll get some info about finding case law and statutes, and below that, we have recommendations for journal articles, blogs, and other secondary sources. So lots of potentially useful resources for finding the law in foreign countries in these research guides. The other source for research guides that I want to highlight is a database called Foreign Law Guide. This is something that's a paid database that won't come up in Google, and it actually, in some cases, highlights specific animal law statutes for some countries. You can find Foreign Law Guide through the library's A to Z database list under the letter F. What we'll find on Foreign Law Guide is an alphabetical list of countries like GlobalX. you're going to find on Foreign Law Guide primary and secondary source recommendations like you would with other research guides, but it goes a little bit further because it indexes laws by subject as well. So let's look at their guide on China. What we have here are some links up at the top to pages that may provide some useful background info. For example, info about China's legal system and some research advice. Then we have pages that link to primary sources, so statutory publications like the Official Gazette and the statutory codes and court reports. Then below that, we have pages for various subject areas. So what the authors have done here is highlight various laws by subject. So if you're looking for primary sources specifically on Chinese animal welfare law, we can click through that link and we'll get some recommendations for secondary sources. For example, some law review articles discussing Chinese animal welfare law. And then below that, we'll have links to specific statutes, or at very least citations to specific statutes in China that involve animals. These also may include English translation links where available, but that's not guaranteed. So Foreign Law Guide can be useful for finding both foreign laws, in some case article recommendations, and if we want to take a step back and just look at general resources for Chinese legal research rather than something specific to just animal law, we can go to the main page and look at the resources linked up top here. If we wanted more info on finding case law, for example, we could click the Court Reports tab and we'll see some recommendations for how to find court reports, though some of these are just citations to print resources that we may not have access to. Foreign Law Guide sometimes links to English translations of laws, though a lot of the time you'll just have to try plugging in websites into Google Translate in order to generate a machine-translated version of the site. The last place I want to recommend for foreign legal research is the database Lexis, but I want to emphasize that this is only going to be useful for a small handful of jurisdictions. On the Lexis homepage, if you go to the International tab, you'll see links to a few country-specific resources. For most of these jurisdictions, there's relatively little available, but there's actually a decent collection of cases and statutes available for former members of the British Empire. So, for example, I would recommend checking out Lexis for laws related to India, cases or statutes, but not Russian or Argentinian laws. If you're looking for animal laws specifically, you might want to start with one of the previously mentioned databases like Fowlex or Ecolex, and you might actually find that free databases have some better coverage than what's on Lexis for some of these countries. But if you are researching a country like the UK, Canada, Australia, India, or New Zealand, you might find searching the cases and statutes on Lexis useful as well. Last, I want to highlight a couple other considerations when researching foreign law. First, I want to note the difference between common and civil law jurisdictions. This is kind of complicated, but just a little flag here. In the US, we heavily rely on case law to interpret legislation, and in some situations, we use it to legally bind litigants in the absence of legislation altogether. Tort law in the United States, for example, largely relies on judge-created tests. In civil law countries, which include most countries that weren't former members of the British Empire, case law has limited precedential value, and it's rare to see judge-created tests. In these jurisdictions, cases are not seen as necessarily as directly a source of the law as in the United States. Oftentimes, they might be seen more as evidence of its application as opposed to a source of the law itself. Because of the diminished importance of case law in civil law jurisdictions, cases are typically less readily available. For example, judgments from intermediate courts in South Korea are not readily available unless you have a Korean social security number that you can use to access restricted databases. I also want to note that for citing foreign laws using Blue Book format, you'll not only need to follow Rule 20 in your Blue Book, but also the recommended citations in Table 2 of the Blue Book, which strangely is only available online at legalbluebook.com. Even if you have the print version of the book, it's just going to tell you to go to the website to view these tables. The foreign law rules in the Blue Book are honestly very out of date and assume that you have access to materials that may be impossible for us to obtain, such as old foreign case reporters. So sometimes we just have to do our best to approximate foreign legal citations. One of the things I recommend when trying to cite foreign law according to Blue Book format is to find published journal articles that have cited something similar in the past. For example, if you're citing a Colombian law, you could try to find a journal article discussing Colombian law and try to follow a similar format for your own citations. Though, in my experience, it does take a lot of guesswork to craft Blue Book citations for foreign law. It's really only a citation style built to handle U.S. federal law, and beyond that, the rules are pretty ambiguous. Remember that both the Writing Center and the library are available to help you if you get stuck trying to figure out citations, or if you need help finding foreign primary or secondary sources generally.